there is a strong strand in American opinion, which shows that about a quarter of the American people have said consistently that we should have a foreign policy which minded our own business, so to speak. If the largest participant doesn't take the lead, others are not going to. Then the question is whether in that chaotic situation, not only the world, whether it's better off, but is the largest participant better off? And I think it's better to produce that degree of order.
Okay, I mean, just in relation to the Russian-Ukraine war right now, I was speaking to a friend who was quite familiar with your work, and he thought that it might be wise in this interview to bring up the isolationist realism and its rise in popularity, especially now in the wake of this war. And I'll let you answer that before kind of opening up the discussion a bit further.
Well, there has been a reaction in American opinion in the direction of isolationism. One has to be careful with the use of the term. It's not like the isolationism of the 1930s. But if you look at the Chicago Council...
Could you clarify isolationism? Sorry to interrupt there, just for our audience a little bit.
That isolation in the 1930s was the Americans saying we want nothing to do with Europe and we're not going to do anything to deter Hitler or Mussolini. And the Congress passed bills such as the Neutrality Act, which prevented our assistance. Roosevelt fought against this, but it took him a long time, and it actually was the Japanese bombing at Pearl Harbor that broke through this. But the point is, there is a strong strand in American opinion, which is measured by the council, the Chicago Council, which shows that about a quarter of the American people have said consistently that we should have a foreign policy which minded our own business, so to speak. And then there have been something like, I don't know, anywhere between 60 and 7% who said we have to take a leading position. That has been true since Vietnam, or the reaction against Vietnam. But there's some indications that it may be increasing. This mind your own business approach may be increasing. And it's not necessarily left or right. There are some of these tendencies on the left, and there's some on the right. But how strong they'll become and how much they'll influence the administration over the next 4 years, I think there's still going to be a dominant strand which will involve or keep the U.S. involved, but there may be a difference in degree of how much involvement.
Yeah, I've had this debate with a couple of my friends as well, and in my social circles, in that I'm quite strongly on the position that US should be involved. They should fund Ukraine. However, I've had my views challenged quite strongly, especially when kind of it's put to me the idea of the American person, the average American person who's struggling. And this is something I heard you speak about a little bit in the podcast. It's the idea of why should we worry about what's 50 years from now, whether that's the climate erosion or Russia's potential rise in power in the Far Eastern Bloc, when what's happening right now is our economic struggles.
Well, I think it helps to put this in a longer historical perspective.
Sure.
I titled my memoir, A Life in the American Century, because in 1941, the term the American century, which was coined by the publisher Henry Luce, was to argue that since the Americans had become the most powerful country, if they didn't help promote some degree of international order, it wouldn't be produced at all. And I think that even though the American century today is very different from what it was in 1945 when the U.S. had half of world product, the U.S. still remains the strongest power. since 1970, it's been about 25% of the world economy. And that's where it stands today. And it's interesting if you look at the rise of China's share of the world economy, it's come primarily at the expense of Japan and Europe, not the United States. So that means that if you're going to think about a provision of international order, the U.S. are still the largest country, and you get back to this question of free riding, which is if the largest participant doesn't take the lead, others are not going to. And then the question is whether in that chaotic situation, not only the world, whether it's better off, but is the largest participant better off? And I think it's better to produce that degree of order, even though sometimes it's self-serving and may have aspects of hypocrisy. The alternative of let's say chaotic order is, or it's almost an oxymoron there, but a chaotic situation is going to be worse for everyone.
As this interview does come to a close, with about 5 minutes left, I want to maybe think about you and your specific role in American history. In the last few decades, you've been quite involved. And maybe you can speak from your own personal experience, but how hopeful are you for not only the future of America, but a future where countries can be more cooperative with each other? Because as it stands now, 2025, things don't look hopeful, at least in my eyes.
Well, I conclude my memoir with a phrase that have a faint ray of guarded optimism. But there are many things that challenge that, which I discuss in the final chapter. So that's why I call it a faint ray. But I still think if you look at history, you'll see that we have come through worse periods. After all, in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt thought we might be at the death knell of democracy in America. And in the 1960s, you had, cities in flames and bombs going off. I had a bomb that went off in my building at Harvard. And we overcame that. I think the period we're going through right now is another trough, but I think that there's a resilience in the culture which suggests that we'll get through it. But as I said, it's guarded optimism. It's not full optimism.
I feel like there is a feeling among many that a large part of this situation that we've ended up in is due to Western hypocrisy. And I don't know how much you'd agree, but even stretching back to Iraq, it is the saving of democracy is done through the killing of hundreds and thousands of people, right? The current war in Ukraine, many people would argue, is the cause of NATO expansionism, the exact sort of thing that NATO kind of accuses Russia of, is expanding. So while these are not direct comparisons, I think a lot of people, especially now with the war in Gaza, feel that the West pushes certain ideas and ideals, but doesn't hold them themselves.
Well, I think there's always hypocrisy in international relations. Reconciling state interests with an ideal international order is bound to produce accusations of hypocrisy. But I think the argument that Putin's invasion of Ukraine was caused by NATO expansion it's a popular meme, but just simply not true. There was no prospect that NATO was going to expand to include Ukraine in 2016 or in 2022. And if you read what Putin wrote in 2021 about denying that Ukraine was a real nation and arguing that it was part of Russia, that tells you a lot more about why he invaded than the pretext that he used. On the Middle East, I think there is a lot of hypocrisy. I think that, what you have is a brutal assault by Hamas against Israel, where they killed a great many Israeli citizens. And then you have the Israelis responding in what might be a just war, but they don't observe the principles of just war, which is discrimination and of minimizing the immense civilian casualties. And in that sense, even though you can say that the cause of the Israeli response was just, responding to the Hamas attack, the methods which they used did not adhere to what we would call a just war principle. So there is hypocrisy there.
How hopeful are you for not only the future of America, but a future where countries can be more cooperative with each other?
Since the Americans had become the most powerful country, if they didn't help promote some degree of international order, it wouldn't be produced at all.
A large part of this situation that we've ended up in is due to Western hypocrisy.
And I think that defeat is not good for Ukraine, it's not good for Europe, it's not good for NATO. If you look at history, you'll see that we have come through worse periods. After all, in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt thought we might be at the death knell of democracy in America.
Hi guys, we hope you enjoyed that clip from our episode with Joseph Nye. If you want to check out the full interview, you can click right here. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe. Comment down below.